after they graduate. They save up and they just focus on the bar, and they wait till they get the results and they get a legal job. Some students take a leave of absence from their work. It's also possible. A lot of our evening students actually transfer to the day program at their final year to take at least one summer employment in. Right. So there are different options. It's never my job to count someone else's money. But the reason why I want to show you this is the sort of work habits that people have as 2Ls and 3Ls carry over directly to the bar prep. Right. The number of hours that we're asking for the bar prep, 40, 45 hours a week, is not that much comparable to what maybe you should be doing now. Right. It's probably more, but it's in the same ballpark. Right. Because you're not in class. So you're in class now 10 to 12 hours a week, plus maybe 30 hours of prep. So again, I don't give you this to scare you or to be mean. I'm not trying to be mean. I actually like all of your company. I think you're all very nice. But when participation is lacking, and just because you're not reading enough and you're not doing enough work, just keep this chart in mind. I'll show you another chart that I'm sorry, man. This is the class here for, but this is what we're doing today. The second time, where is it? Sorry, can't find it. Anyway, the numbers on second time pass rate, that is people who fail once and take it again, is usually below 50%. So if you fail the bar the first time, the odds are you're not going to pass it the second time. You can, people do it, but the second time pass rate's not high. All right, let me just make that one level up. For the evening students who fail it once and they can't devote the time the first go around, it's less likely to get the second time around. One of my evening students, actually, she graduated in a second. Okay, one second. One of my students actually graduated in December, and she took the bar in June to give herself 6 months to study because she was working full time and she had family. Anyway, so look, I'm giving all this, and I'm sorry if the person is thinking of coming here, but these are things you have to be aware of. Now, I think our evening division is stronger than any other law school in the state. You're not going to get this level of attention and care at the other law schools with evening divisions. Right? You have full-time faculty teaching all of your classes for 1L and 2L. Right? You're not having adjuncts full-time. If you're at UH, you're going to have adjuncts teaching a lot of your required evening classes. So we care about you, but we can only do so much. Yes, sir. Oh, you're talking about the uniform bar exam? Right. So a couple years ago, Texas switched to what's called the Uniform Bar Exam, the UBE, which is basically an exam that's offered across the country. And where's this one? So the cutoff score in Texas, as the score you need to pass in Texas, might be one thing, and the score you might need another thing might be higher or lower. 90-something% of our kids practice in Texas. I don't know the exact number; it's pretty darn high. So these are all Texas numbers. I don't know what the number happens to be for other states. One second, timer. We did have students, I'm not joking, who felt weak, and they actually went to take the bar. I think it was New Mexico. Don't quote me on this, which has a lower cut score. That we actually had some students who were performing low on the model bar exams, and they weren't able to get to the Texas cut score, and they said, all right, whatever, I'll be a lawyer in New Mexico. I have no idea if they actually passed. But there's some students who actually use that as a strategy. I can't endorse it, but I'm telling you, I know people have done that. I think it was in New Mexico, it was Colorado. It was one of those box states, right? One of the square ones. Can't remember which one. Yes.
Actively working. I know the Langdale sessions are not going to be online. So do they think that could be a part of it too? Because I know, like, for your class, it's going to be only in person, so not in part-time.
We've had an evening program for almost like 80. I swear to you, this is not because of Langdells. Trust me, this is not because of Langdells. I know you're very bitter about the not you particularly, but about the Langdell recording. But we've had evening divisions for 100 years. It's not the Zoom. What does matter though is the hours, and I really my suspicion is during the COVID time, people were just home more, and they had more time to do the prep. The last 2 months of prep. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So during the COVID semesters, you were all about the same. Yeah, that's a fair point. I think about that. I don't know. I don't think this is competency. I make this point very clear. I think that the difference is just hours and how many hours you can devote to the work. It's truly ask Dean Yar. I think it's 40 or 45 hours a week, and they can say if you do that those 2 months, it's not Langdell. It's not that. I am not convinced anything I say here will make a difference of bar passage rate. I mean that sincerely. People think, oh, if you learn property barriers a 1L, you'll learn it all over again. You won't remember this in a year and a half. Trust me. Like what we do here, maybe remember some things, you won't remember anything. It's the work ethic is what actually sticks. It's the ability to drill yourself in. That actually was what carries through. A lot of our kids don't even take half the bar classes, right? They have this thing, if you're below a GPA, you got to take more of the bar classes. Some of our students don't take a lot of them. I never, because I never took corporations or any of those classes. I took all common law classes. What do I know? Yeah, Aaron.
Um, I was just wondering if the school collects like the data of what part-time students are leaving their jobs to study for the bar as far as passage rate courses.
I've sort of asked anecdotally. I don't think they track that because it's a really personal question. I'm not sure that all students volunteer it, but just anecdotally, I'm just telling you what my students have done. I've had a lot of students who, for the third year, they just go full time and take on the debt, and they just sort of do their third year. In other words, the summer after what would be their third year, their second year summer, they leave their positions if they can afford it, which not everyone can do, of course, and they get like a summer internship, or they work for a judge, they do some clerkship, right? Because again, you're not gonna two classes in a row, you're not gonna like it, but a lot of our evening students graduate without ever having had a legal job, no internship, no clerkship, nothing, and then they're just like, okay, I passed the bar, now what? And for some of you, you know what you want to do, right? You have something lined up, right? You know you're gonna hang your own shingle. Maybe you have a family job, right? Maybe your family's a law firm. Maybe some of our kids, they actually work at corporations. They know they can take a general counsel position, right? They can sort of lateral in within their own entity, right? So maybe within your own, this might be for you around as well. They might actually have something lined up. For some of you, it's like, well, I've always wanted to go to law school, and you kind of just did it, and then you're sort of just, all right, now what? So the reason why I mentioned the resign your job is not to tell you to go into massive debt, which I don't encourage anyone to do. But some of our kids do it for bar prep, but also to get the sort of legal experience so they can actually maybe get a job when they graduate. Uh, I it breaks my heart when you have an evening student works a butt off for 4 years, they fail the bar, and just look at these numbers. The pass rate is about 57%, so a little bit more than half. And then what? So, you know, they're still doing the job they had before, and they have to get for the bar all over again 6 months out. Just sort of demoralizing. There's a huge psychological toll to failing the bar. It's not just, oh, let me do it again in 6 months. It's not like the LSAT's offered every couple months, right? You can take it again. This is twice a year, and it's a pretty big deal. There's a lot of paperwork. I mean, the things you have to do. Yeah, I'm not here to depress you, but the reason why I'm perhaps a little bit stickler on the prepping for class is not because you won't remember what an easement and gross is in 2 years. You just won't. Just believe me, you won't remember. You won't remember I do future interest questions. Do you know what the Barbary? So the president of Barbary came to us a couple years ago, and he gave us a lecture. And I actually asked him about future interest questions. Do you know what their advice is for future interest questions? Skip them; they're not worth it. That in the entire bar there might be one or two future interest questions, and the amount of time they take, if you're not sure, just skip it. And what we spent 9 weeks in that in property one. So again, the stuff we're teaching you is not that you'll necessarily remember from the bar. It's a thought process. It's drilling you both to prep at home and also think on your feet and to develop these skills. That's what your law school education is for. It's not, you won't remember, what rule 17 of the rules procedures are. Just you won't remember this stuff. Yes, sir.
You said we get access to this once we graduate, or we have access to it now? I would love to do a statistical analysis on it because it looks like
On what?
on the numbers, do a further breakdown because it looks like when placed on the even plane, even students and full-time students are able to do the same thing. But it feels simplistic to say is this the number of hours, but it's also balancing things. Most full-time students like myself, I have 3 kids and I also have
Of course,
school as
I
well.
know. Yeah.
And I'm still able to do everything, but it just feels simplistic just to say that, well, you're not putting enough time, you're not devoted.
No, I'm not saying anyone's not doing it, but the students who don't, my point is different. It's that the evening students are less likely to be able to do those hours. So that, do you disagree with that point? I mean, yeah. I mean, it's in terms of who's able to do the 45 hours a week. Let's just assume that's the number, right? 45 hours a week. It's gonna be harder when you have a 40-hour job and 3 kids. Yeah, I mean, look, I have 2 kids now. I didn't used to have 2 kids. My hours have shrunk significantly. I know how it goes. Anyway, I depressed you all, didn't I? I ruined your Valentine's Day. I ruined your February 16th as well.
But you said we do get access to this now?
This
Yeah.
this is even a few. This is I'm giving these because I'm a nice guy because I respect all of you, and that's why I'm doing this. This is actually given to us as professors. We don't give this to the students usually. So
Adaptive bar, we do get access.
adaptive bar, yes. So if you go to the what floor is it on now? They moved around. The academic success is on second floor now. Second floor, right? They moved around. I can never remember. It's on the second floor. Go talk to Dean Yara, Tony Zamora. These guys are until 9 o'clock every night because they're helping the. So the bar is what in about 10 days. I think it's like the 27th or 28th. It's in about 2 weeks. They're here every night till 9 p.m. And 1 second, Giselle. And I can tell you, when I come here before the bar, I came here on a Saturday. My students are here. I come here at 8 p.m. They're studying, right? They're studying around the clock, right? If you just look at their habits, they're just here all the time, and it's they're during the hours. Yes, ma'am.
So if you school looks at these numbers, what are they doing to help the part-time students? Because I mean, even now, like we complain all the time how the events that they have are during work time
Yeah.
hours. Like they're not very adaptive to be flexible to.
Well, let me tell you something you're not going to like. So we have this new full online JD program, right? I don't know if we still have an online division in 10 years. In other words, how many of you? There's 30 of you here. We used to have a 50-person evening division. It's shrunk over the years. Fewer and fewer people getting evening degrees. That's why we're doing this online stuff that you're also interested in, because we can then attract people who can actually make the program worth it. 30 people is a very small class, right? It's a very small class. The finances may not be there to keep this many sections open. We have a spring start. That's also much smaller section, right? So every section you have to staff 5 professors for each section, and that's not free. And you can do multiplication when there are fewer students with fewer tuition dollars. So I don't know that the traditional evening program exists in 10 years. I mean, that doesn't affect you, of course. You're here to graduate. I know that it does, because if a lot of people start doing the online only option, which might appeal to some of you, this might just fade away. This school is celebrating its 100th anniversary, right? It began as a YMCA school for evening students. That's how it began. That was the heritage for evening students, and it's dwindled over the years. UT does not have an evening program. UH might, but it's pretty small. So we have actually one of the better ones in the state. Now, what are we doing? We have a very rigorous bar team. Dean Yarrow and Tony Zamora, who you should get to know. They work very closely with students. But no matter what we do, nothing substitute for hours to do the prep. I mean, there's nothing that can replace the number of hours it takes to do the preparation. Nothing we do can do it. We can't feed it to you. It requires time, and that's something that fortunately evening students don't always have, which is why it's sort of an awkward conversation. Maybe some of you are really bright, and you can make do with, so you'll say 30 hours a week, right? And you start taking the practice exams, and you're just acing them. Okay, great. That's not for everyone.
Is there? I've been wondering this really since started. It's like, clearly we can't just go maybe take a full bar exam because we haven't covered all the topics, like as a 2L. But I mean, is there a way to study kind of as we go?
Yeah. I mean, Barbary, these classes have policies. I mean, you can sign up as a Barbary student as your first year of law school, and they give you questions throughout. Yeah, I mean, I'm very sympathetic to the idea that events are scheduled during the day.
I mean, that was just an example.
No, it's true. I've tried to schedule events in the evening, and the attendance sucks because most people get there at 5:45 and barely get to class in time. So it's very hard I mean, my goodness, I've asked for 3 weekends in the semester, and people are rebelling that they're objecting to 3 Saturday mornings in a semester, which is a time when I know you can get there. It's tough. So I give you this to put you on notice about what, after you graduate, what those 2.5 months are going to look like, and make preparation. I'd rather you have this notice now than you just sort of walk into it, you graduate with a good GPA. It's like, uh-oh, you all have families, you have jobs, and I think it's my moral responsibility to tell you this. I actually used to have a guy. He graduated a few years ago. He used to be our, I don't know what his title is. He was our numbers guy. He made these charts, and I actually had him come and talk to my evening students about these numbers. This was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. He graduated since, and he would explain to them the differences between bar passage and night and day. And I had him do this. Maybe I should do it again. But anyway, all right. Sorry, I make you guys all sad. But I can't. These are numbers, right? This is just what we have. Yeah, I don't know if there's an evening division in 10 years. I really don't know, because now we have this flex where you can go in the evening 2 days a week, right? And you can do online 2 days a week. And then we have this full evening division, and then we're gonna start next year all online division. I mean, just show of how many of you would have taken the all online option if you had it? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, maybe a third of you. Okay, and if that happens year after year and it keeps growing, and this section's down to 12 or 14, 15 people, it may not exist anymore. Yeah.
Before I came here, I was looking at an online MBA, and when I met with them, they told me that it's not the same experience.
Of course, it's not.
You do a lot worse.
Well, look. I mean, I don't want to. We've not done it before, right? We haven't actually done it before, so I can't speak to it. So maybe we better. But I have not volunteered to teaching it. I'll just say that. I like this. I missed this when we were in the pandemic world. I missed this. I can't walk around and kind of hear people whispering and people like making jokes. I don't get that on the Zoom. All right. What else? I don't need to scare you. I'm being honest, 100% honest. I want to be sincere with you because you're all adults. You guys are footing your own bills too. I know that you're paying your own tuition. Most of the day kids are not. Someone else is paying their tuition. So yes, sir.
I can speak to that. I'm in an online MBA class now.
You're doing 2 degrees at once?
Yeah.
Look at you.
Yeah, it's not
What school is it from?
LSU.
How are you doing 2 degrees at once?
I started at the MBA and then I got into law school and I wasn't going to stop
So when does the MBA run out? How many more?
this year.
Well, you're a Superman. I can't do that. Goodness, 2 degrees at once. How do you even keep track which class you're going? You coming?
Calendar, white.
Calendar wife.
Tell
Okay.
me what day to do what.
Yes, sir. All right.
Sorry, is he a full-time student?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm a full-time student
In
here.
your MBA program?
Yeah. Your other section is the section I'm usually in, but I had to switch because I made a couple of trial things.
All right. There we go. I didn't know that. All right. What else? Armand, did I scared you away? Are you thinking of day or night? I don't put you on the spot, but are you thinking of day or night? Yeah. Oh, that's right. You mentioned that. Yeah, the online, there are some people who the online, like I talked to one guy who was in Brownsville, right? He can't go to law school. There is no law school in Brownsville. Like there's what? Brownsville, Texas, yeah. There is no law school there, is there? No, you're like a 9-hour drive to a law school. This is probably the closest one. And he wants to go to law school, so the online will let him do that. Right? People live out, that kind of person will give an opportunity for. Yes,
I would say it's perspective, like even if you're gonna I got my master's online, and I graduated from my class, and it's the same exact program that they
same degree.
It's the same degree, it's the same program, I think the same classes.
Yeah.
And I think the benefit of that is that you're on pace. If you're rushing through it, trying and you really can't handle that load, then why don't you just take it slower and do it better? I think it's just perspective.
Well, some students also do evening students is they delay their graduation. Instead of graduating in 4 years, you do 4.5 years. And they pace out their semesters. Which is what, again, I don't want to say this, but some of you should probably consider that. If you're not able to keep up with the reading, stretch it out. Right? Takes summer, stretch things out. And that would actually allow you. One student I remember, she took her last semester only one class, and she spent that studying for the bar. And so basically, she was taking one class or maybe two classes and studying for the bar, and then she took the bar the following. So basically, she had the entire semester plus the summer to study for the bar. So there are a lot of strategies. You come to my office if you want to talk, or maybe we'll set up. I don't know. I'll think, but I'll think about something because I want to be honest with you all because we got these numbers recently. I'm like, holy crap, that's a huge gap between the days and the nights, especially after we had sort of closed the gap in the last few years. And we do everything we can to do. Trust me, we have meetings upon meetings of how to help you better for the bar. Like this is actually at most law schools they don't care about this, but this like preoccupies almost all of our meetings of how to do this better. So we think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like how Len said, like when we were doing virtual and the part-time and the full-time was basically on the same level.
Yeah.
Like, I don't necessarily think because regardless, even if you were working from home, you're still working the same hours. I don't think it's necessarily the hours. I think it might be something to do with other factors.
Mm-hmm. Nick?
But remember, so to Giselle's point, law school was 3 or 4 years. Before that.
Most of their education was in person. Yeah. It's the crunch time. It's the 2 months before the exam. That's really where it makes a difference. Right. Most of those kids in 2021 had their entire law school careers in person. They made just 1 semester online, 2 semesters online. It's the crunch time. It's between May and July. That's like the magic time when you need those hours. So if you think of the summer of 2020, what the hell were anyone was doing? We're sitting watching Netflix all day, right? Right. Summer of 2021, a little bit less Netflixing, but most of us still sort of locked. Yeah. I can't remember. I wish I could, and I just don't remember. That was an anomaly, but there's usually 10, 20, 30. That's the range. No. I think the UB might have been the year or two after. I don't think that was UBE. I don't think so. Maybe someone can Google that and check me. I don't think it was. I don't remember, to be honest. I was had that same question before. All right, what else? Did you property? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't turn the attendance on. I apologize. I'll turn this on right now. Other questions? All right, we can go talk some other time if you want. All right. So let's do property, but I did want to show you this as a follow-up from last class. All right. All right. So this is our third and final class on easements. Next class on Tuesday, we start a new topic called covenants. If you'll notice in the syllabus, the reading is 3 pages. So you're thinking, oh, yay, 3 pages. That's great. Yeah, not so great. It's really hard. So covenants is a very hard topic. Please read those pages carefully. It might take you a while to get through them. But at least let's wrap up easements today. Let me just sort of summarize what we've done so far. When you get an easement question, you really have a couple steps to think about. The first step you ask yourself is it an easement in gross or an easement appurtenant? That is it benefiting a person or benefiting a property? After you've decided what kind of easement it is, you ask yourselves, what is the dominant tenement and what is the servient tenement? The dominant tenement is that which is being benefited, and the servient tenement is that which is being burdened. You'll have both of them with an easement appurtenant, but an easement in gross, you only have one of them. You only have a servient tenement. Okay, so beyond the express easements, you also have implied easements. That is, easements created by a court. You can have a quasi easement, which a court implies based on prior usage. Or you can have an easement by necessity, or at least in Texas, the courts only imply it if it's absolutely necessary. And then you have the easements by prescription. Prescription is very similar to adverse possession, the same 4 elements, but the difference is you don't get the full bundle of sticks. You only get one of the sticks in the bundle. Right? The right to cross, the right to retrieve water, and so on. Okay. All right. questions so far? All right. Oh, yes, Emma.
I think I kind of asked questions before, but I just wanted to clarify. So the easement by prescription, that is kind of separate from, it's neither an easement.
It's not an.
And not
It's.
easement.
No. Well, you're half right. Prescriptive easement is not an implied easement. Okay. We have two types of implied easements. We have the quasi easement and the easement by necessity. Prescription is a different deal. And the reason why is implied easements are a matter of equity. Does the court think there's enough fairness? Is there enough? It's like a balancing test. Whereas with a prescriptive easement, it's a statutory thing. There are 4 elements, either meet them or you don't. So very often, if you fail to meet the 4 elements of a prescription, you fall back on an implied easement, right? That's your backup. But you're then at the court's mercy of equity. Now, your second question is a prescriptive easement in gross or appertenant? That's on the board. Let's just do that question. Okay, well, I think it's question 5. Let's do it. And Amanda, I don't have the clicker, but we have these apps we use on our phone to answer questions. So let's see. Okay, question 5. A prescriptive easement is an A, easement appertenant, or B, an easement in gross? All right. So we got here. All right. The answer here is B. It's an easement in gross. And let me explain why. When you acquire a prescriptive easement or easement by prescription, it's not because you own any particular piece of land. It's because you personally have walked across Blackacre for 10 years with the right state of mind. It's something that you have personally. It's in gross. An easement gained by prescription is not tied to a piece of land, so it's always going to be in gross. Emma, is that your question?
I have a question about that. Is there any way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that there's a good way, but imagine that. I'm trying to give you an example that would work. Imagine that, for 5 years you cross this land, and then for another 5 years your friend crosses land, you add together. Possibly, but I don't really think it works. It's really for the benefit of one person. To use the case from today, the 2 brothers were running the bathing operation for a decade, and they gained the easement together. What if, maybe one was there for 5 years, the other was there for 5 years? Maybe. I'm not familiar with any cases, but I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. Yeah, and then
Like, what if someone uses it for 5 years and then they die, the family member keeps you?
well, if they die, they may not be privity, so just be careful. That'd be some agreement of the handoff. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I got my notes wrong. So so I said that an easement by prescription is not an easement in gross. So you would need to sell it or transfer it as part of it, like, so it doesn't,
Well,
it doesn't
whoa.
apply to,
The question whether you can assign an easement in gross is actually separate, right? Because later we'll talk in class. I think it's question 6 or 7. That's question 6. Can you assign an easement in gross? We'll talk about that in a few minutes.
okay, so,
But an easement by prescription has to be in gross. It cannot be appertenant. Casey, your hand up? You got it? Yeah, good. Anything else? All right. Let's try question number 1. Okay, question number 1. Okay. So it says Adam owns Blackacre and Whiteacre, period. Adam sells Blackacre to Betsy, but reserves an easement that allows the owner of Whiteacre to cross over Blackacre, period. Betsy buys Whiteacre and then sells to Carl. Carl can cross Blackacre, True or false? Just put your answer in, and then I'll call volunteers in a moment. Sorry. Okay, another 10 seconds. All right, Jacob, you seem to be eager on this one. What's your answer?
B, false,
Okay, why do you say false?
because it came into the same ownership, it gets extinguished.
Okay, very good. Okay, good. That's good. 80%. Good. So we have a situation, right? You cannot trespass against yourself. Everyone agree on that one, right? You can't trespass on yourself. You also can't have an easement against yourself. If it ever happens that the same person has both the dominant and servient tenements, again, the same person has both the dominant and servient tenements, any easements are extinguished. If the same person has both dominant and servient, the easement is extinguished. This is what's called the merger doctrine. The merger doctrine. Why is it called the merger? Because when you merge the dominant and the servient, any sort of easements, any sort of restrictions vanish, because you cannot have an easement against yourself. So in this case, an easement was placed on Whiteacre. It was an easement appertenant for the benefit of the owner of Blackacre. I'm sorry, I reversed it. There was an easement on Blackacre placed for the benefit of the owner of Whiteacre. Okay. But at that point, Betsy then acquired Whiteacre. She owned both the dominant and servient tenements. Under the merger doctrine, the easements vanished. What happens when she sells it to Carl? No resurrection. The easement does not come back into effect. Once the easement's extinguished, it's gone forever. And that's actually one of the ways in which easements can be abolished or terminated through the merger doctrine. AJ, if I
Sorry. So if it's the easement at appertenant and it's on the land, like they allow the public.
You said the public? That's not really an easement appertenant. Yeah, it's kind of a public easement. Also, it's an easement gross for the public. It's not like another category. But if it's specifically the same person owns both an easement appertenant, I'm sorry, the same person owns both the dominant estate and the serving estate, you can't trespass against yourself. You can't have an easement on yourself. The easement vanishes. At the end of your readings, there's like about 10 different ways to terminate an easement, and one of them is the merger doctrine. Okay. Questions on this one? Good. Yeah, I promise you, if I have a question, easements in the exam, there'll be a merger issue on there, right? I always ask this, and it trips up the unwary. Because if you don't realize the same person comes to ownership of the dominant and serving tenement, you're doing all this work of tracing an easement doesn't exist anymore. So I put this on almost every exam, almost every year. So just be alert of that one, right? That's writing this out quickly. No, I'm sorry?
I was talking to myself, it doesn't even make any sense
What doesn't make any sense?
to have an easement against yourself.
You can't. So that's why it dissolves. It vanishes. Yeah, but you know what? When you're in the exam and you're getting stressed, you just don't see that. You miss it, and it happens every year. That's why I'm warning. I'm giving you fair warning. What I'll ask you. Maybe I will, maybe won't. But if I do an easement question, there's probably a merger issue. Okay. Do you want to do other questions now? We'll do questions 6 and 7 a little bit later. I want to do the Miller case. All right. Dare I ask, does anyone want to volunteer the facts of this case? This case is a beast. Oh, Mr. MBA. No, I mean that's really impressive. I don't know if our students because some of our students they do the St. Thomas thing. They do like an MBA first and second. That's impressive. That was the plan. All right, you want to give it the facts, please?
Yeah, so initially, Frank Miller owned the land. His basically the first easement he had when Rector was taken, property or the land was taken from him, so it ended up going to his wife's business that was owned by his wife, then him and his brother. You want me to give the exact dates as well?
Give as much as you want, and I'll fill in the.
Alright.
I have to walk through this one. The gaps here are actually very tricky.
So then there's March, March 20th, 1899, that grant Frank Miller the exclusive right to use water specifically for the dam that they created or the lake that they created, Lake Naomi.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, he then formed a business relationship or partnership with his brother, Rufus, who then gave him exclusive rights to the same things as him. They then had bath houses and boating houses that they used for profitable gain or for business on either side. Frank had 3/4 of the profit and the money that went into it. Rufus got 1/4, and same thing. They did it they maintained that relationship for 10 years, no issues. Then he died. Then his estate was doing the same thing, and they were selling things or giving licenses to various organizations. They ended up giving one to the Lutheran Conference and Camp Association,
Mm-hmm.
who was using a bathhouse. And it sounded like there was some tension there, but Frank didn't want that anymore, so they went into an argument he brought suit to stop them from using it because they didn't have the exclusive rights. And even if they did have the exclusive rights, that wasn't assignable to them at the time. And he ended up getting an injunction to stop them from using the property as they were, because they didn't have the right to do so.
Very good. Let me ask you a business question if I can. Why do you think they create all these different corporations and entities generally? And why are all these corporations and entities being created?
So they wouldn't be personally liable.
Yes, sir. Exactly. So you haven't taken corporations yet, but eventually you will. The reason why you create a corporation is to shield yourself from liability. Maybe you all know this, right? If you have debts in your own name and you owe people money, they can come after your property. They come after your bank account. They can put wage garnishments, lots of things. But if the debt belongs to a corporation, the most they can do is to take the assets of the corporation. And this might be an example where this family, which is very weird, used corporations to their advantage because they had this corporation, the Pocono Springs Company, that went bust. And then magically the Pocono Pines Corporation popped up, which is owned by the guy's wife, right? So they basically were using corporations to shield their businesses that were going to fail. But when you have all these various corporations, the facts get very ugly. So let me walk through this with you one step at a time. And if you haven't read the case summary of this one, I'd encourage you to do so because this fact I hate to. I like this case, but the facts are not pleasant. Right. So we start in 1895. Okay, we have Frank and Rufus, who are the two brothers, and they have a corporation called Pocono Springs. This case arose in the Pocono Mountains. Anyone ever been there? Beautiful, right? It's in the mountains of Pennsylvania, maybe an hour and a half from New York, not too far from where I grew up. A beautiful place. And they own some land up there. The brothers created this man-made lake by building a dam. And then they leased the lake to the corporation for 99 years. Now you might ask, why would they lease it to the corporation for 99 years? Why don't they just sell a fee simple? Oh, with a lease, you have reversion. At some point, it'll come back to their heirs, right? They want it to be that there was not a permanent transfer. If you're a bank and looking to do a mortgage, and there's only a 99-year lease, you have to realize something. If there's a foreclosure sale, do you get a fee simple? No, you do not. If there's a foreclosure sale, you only get the interest on which the current tenant has, which is a 99-year lease. That actually will come into play in a couple moments. All right. So again, the two brothers own this property. Wouldn't it be just easier if they just kept it themselves? But no, they gave it to this Pocono Springs company with a 99-year lease. And that leads to the contract. The contract said that Pocono Springs has the exclusive right of boating, skating, fishing, and cutting ice. Now, this might be an obvious point, but I'll make it. Before refrigeration, How would you get ice? You get from a cold place, right? They would literally chop up bricks of ice from a frozen lake, put it in an ice box, and transport to New York City or Philadelphia, right? That's how you got ice. All right, but again, the contract did not include bathing or swimming, like a bathing suit, right? The contract did not include bathing. Okay. A couple years later, Pocono Springs places a mortgage on the lake. Again, it's not Frank and Rufus, it's the corporation. They place a mortgage on it. And then the corporation gives Frank certain rights, the rights to fish and boat. Now, wait, doesn't Frank actually own the lake? Why does he need this right? He only has a future interest. He has reversion in 99 years. He'll be dead, but maybe his heirs will get it, right? He has reversion. So in order for him to do anything in that lake, the corporation must give it back to Frank, the rights to do this. So again, Frank and Rufus own the lake. The brothers leased the lake to the company for 99 years, and the company gave Frank rights. But the company did not give rights to Rufus, the brother. They only give rights to Frank. We don't know why. Maybe Rufus was like the little run to the litter, but he wasn't given all the rights. But the very next year, Frank gave a deed to Rufus. They gave him rights for bathing, that is swimming. Did Frank have the bathing rights at this point? No, he did not. So at this point, he couldn't actually give his brother the bathing rights. The contract also said that Rufus would get 25% interest in the privileges. What does it actually mean? Realistically, whatever the proceeds are of the sales, they rent the lake, money, right? You get a quarter cut of the profits from the business. Okay. Again, neither of them had right to bathing at that point. The corporation had the right to bathing. 1900, they form another business partnership to operate a boat and bathhouse. As people go boating, they can go swimming in the lake. And then people can go, enjoy the property in the summertime. Frank would get 75% of the profits, and the brother got a quarter. All right, so let's just pause here. They would engage in this business for 20-something years. Is there prescription? The answer is yes. Right, so just be clear. What are our 4 elements? Is there entry? Yes, people are swimming in that river, swimming in the lake. Is it open and notorious? Yeah, they're swimming there publicly. Is there the right claim of right, though? What is the state of mind? Do you think Frank realized that he was basically trespassing a property owned by his corporation? Probably not. Again, the corporation had the right of bathing. Frank was allowing bathing against the corporation. So this would probably not be a hostile, aggressive trespasser standard. It'd be probably a good faith or objective standard. I'm guessing how the court looked at it. They don't discuss this. Was it continuous? Yes. Even though it's only during the summer, they're using the lake as people would use it. 20 summers in a row, that's enough for continuity. And really, you can't swim in the water once frozen over, so the summer is sufficient. So they meet the requirements for prescriptive easement. Okay. Specifically, Rufus and Frank jointly acquired the 20-year interest in the lake jointly. Yes, Casey? No, the two of them. The reason why is the company had it. Which company? Oh, the joint partnership? No, I know. Okay, so Casey asks a good question. If you recall, was it 1900, they made a business partnership. I think when you use prescription, the interest belongs to the individuals, not the company. That would be my answer to you. So even though they had a partnership and they were engaging in this trespass as part of the partnership, I think that the individuals would have it. And if you don't like that answer, if depending on the partnership was structured, it was still their personal asset. It was still their own, even if it was a partnership. It wasn't a corporation. That's your back. If you don't like my first answer, take that answer. You don't like my first answer, do you? I know he's not happy with my answers. I can tell this, but it's fine. You don't have to agree with me. It's actually not necessary. In fact, you're welcome to think I'm all wrong about everything. But I think you like my second answer better. With a partnership, it's actually the assets of the two of them. I think that's probably the better answer. Okay, it's true. You don't have to agree with the professors. It's true. You don't have to. All right. So now I want to go back to a point. 20 years earlier, Frank conveyed to Rufus a deed for bathing rights. In 1900, Frank did not have those rights. But by the time you get to the 1920s, Frank had those rights. There's a doctrine called equitable conversion. Equitable conversion. What's equitable conversion? I'll describe it. It's not an easy statement to make. If I give you something and I don't have it, but later I get it, you relate back to the original date as if I had it. Again, if I didn't have the bathing rights in 1900, but I got them, let's say, in 1920, and I sold it to you in 1900, we pretend, as a matter of equity, that I had it and to give it in 1900. So effectively, even though in 1900 the deed to Rufus didn't include bathing rights, we treat it as if it did. And that Frank gave his brother the swimming rights in 1900. Okay, why does that matter? Why does that matter? Yeah.
Because they gave the swimming rights to Lutheran.
Okay. Oh, that gets to after the death. I'm not there yet, but you're right. So for all those years, we act as if Frank had a 75% interest in the bathing, and Rufus had 25% interest. But in Pennsylvania, we say they acquired the interest jointly. Jointly. This is what was called the one stock rule. STOCK, one stock rule. And the idea was that if you acquire an interest jointly, it's almost like a joint tenancy. I don't want to say that because it's not exactly, but something you acquire together and you keep together. But the difference is with a joint tenancy, one tenant can destroy it by alienating his property. Right? Unilaterally, right? One joint tenant can sell his interest. But with the one stock rule, you can't. With the one stock rule, both parties need to consent to a transfer to divide it up. Right? They both have to agree. So many years later, well, let's just make it easier, right? Let's say Rufus is still alive. He didn't die yet. Could Rufus have sold his interest in the bathing privileges to the Lutherans while he was still alive? The answer is no. And the reason why the answer is no is because of the one stock rule, right? He could not transfer while he was alive, or his heirs can't transfer when he's dead, because they acquired it jointly. If both Frank and Rufus agreed to give it to the Lutherans, that's fine, right? In law, if both parties consent, there's not going to be an issue. You can do that. But it's basically a restraint on your alienation. You cannot convey your interest. It goes to the heirs of Rufus. It's not like a joint tenancy where the other one gets a fee simple. That's what you're thinking, right? Yeah, I could tell. Yeah, no. That's why with a joint tenancy, if one joint tenant dies, right, the other one gets a fee simple. That's not how it works here, right? When Rufus dies, the heirs of Rufus step into Rufus's shoes. So whatever interest, it's almost like a tenancy in common if you want to think of it that way, right? Right, that the heirs step into the shoes of Rufus. So now the heirs have to play nice with Frank. And the heirs have to seek Frank's consent to convey the interest of the Lutherans. All right, so everyone get the one stock rule, right? So a common law, and then this is questions 6 and 7. I'll just sort of summarize these for you. At common law, easements and groves were not assignable. You could not assign them, right? And they were not divisible. They were not assignable, and they were not divisible. Basically, the only way they could be alienated was through inheritance. You inherited them. If you remember last year, there was a case called Marinholtz. Does that ring a bell? Marinholtz? That whether you could convey a reversionary interest. Marinholtz, it was an Illinois case. Did you not read it? Okay, anyway, well, fine. At common law, you cannot convey certain reversionary interests, like a right of entry. You couldn't convey it. You can only inherit it. So there are some, at common law, there are some property interests that could not be conveyed. They can only be inherited. So here what would happen is that when Rufus died, Rufus's heirs took over his interest. This is why easements in gross were disfavored at common law. They preferred easements appertenant because they're very easy to enforce. It's attached to Blackacre. You know where Blackacre is, not going anywhere. People come, they go, they die. You know where they are. So the easements in gross were disfavored at common law. The law made it very hard to transfer them, and the law made it very hard to divide them. This is why prescriptive easements were in gross. They only basically benefited one person, unless it was an inheritance, right? You could not convey your easement in gross gain through prescription at common law. Today, a different story. Again, so for 6 and 7, at common law, you could not assign, and they were not divisible. The modern approach, the opposite. Yes, you can assign easement in gross. Yes, they can be divisible. The one stock rule is no longer good law. I think I don't know if any state still has it, but at least it's not the majority approach. But today, let's say this case arose in 1900. Rufus's heirs could have given his interest to the Lutherans. No problem. Even though they acquired it together, he had a 25% interest, he could have given it to the Lutherans. I don't know what that would have looked like, though. Imagine you had a lake and you had two different people allowing boating and bathing. It would probably create a problem. People just swimming to each other. It would be probably problematic, but you could do it. Yes, ma'am.
So modern law goes back to, besides when I was cancel that. For.
No, say it again. You have very good notes. If your notes are off, the other people's notes are off. I can see your notes. They're very color coded. It's very nice. I mean, what are your different pen colors? What do they mean? I'm always curious. I've always meant to ask for this for weeks.
Okay. So the black is like the main things, and then the green is like the notes. The purple is like the head note, and then the orange is like.
How many highlighters do you have at home? Do you have like a stock?
I have a lot. My kid throws them around, so they come and go.
Oh, my kids love markers, but I got them dry erase markers. That way they can't screw things up too bad.
Oh, that's fair. No, he just likes to chew on them. He's the chewing on them phase.
Oh man.
So.
No, my daughter, she took a marker and drew all over their white couch.
Absolutely.
And thank God it was a dry erase marker. It's Lysol wipe. Come right off. Lysol wipe came right off. Only dry erase markers. The things you learn in law school.
Find a way to like get it.
No, I know. Anyway, so but to clarify your notes, things you learn, right? At common law, you cannot assign easements in gross, and you cannot divide them.
Right. So the last time, okay, so an easement by prescription is an easement appertenant. Can be.
No. Easement, a prescriptive easement's in gross. That was the question that Emma asked me a few minutes ago.
And so, okay, I'm just gonna have to come to you because this part of this stuff. Okay, just ignore me. It's just because.
I'll start again. Look, an easement, a prescriptive easement's in gross. Yeah, in the modern approach, but you could not at common law. Got it.
So an easement in gross you can sell
today. Yes, ma'am. That's what I was getting at. Yeah. I think there might be a different British rule, but I can't remember entirely.
So on your test, are you gonna say in American course?
You will always be in America unless I tell you otherwise.
And we should assume that's common law.
Well, I might say you're in a common law jurisdiction. I might say you're a modern law jurisdiction.
Right, but you're not gonna say it in American court, though, right?
I don't think I've ever asked that question like that. No.
Okay.
What else? All right. Again, so to summarize the Miller case, which again is a very messy case, you can obtain through prescription, even by using it part-time in a year. But when you obtain a prescriptive easement at common law jointly, it's going to be what's called the one stock rule, and you cannot divide it without the other one's consent. Now, it's curious. One second, Tamara, is that the Pennsylvania court actually said you can assign the easement in gross. So the Pennsylvania court deviated from the common law rule. right? The Pennsylvania court deviated from the common law rule. They said, well, we'll allow you to assign it, but you can't assign it in this case. Now, if the facts were different, what if Frank and Rufus both agreed to assign it to the Lutherans at common law? I'm sorry, in Pennsylvania, they could have done that. The reason why they couldn't here is only one of them, or actually the heirs of one of them consented. I saw another hand somewhere. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
The cases that it is applied to every case law, isn't it? So should we just ignore that part of the rule?
Right. I mean, look, so whenever I give a general rule, there are always going to be exceptions. So
I mean, for like pets, should we just go?
you're welcome to cite that in the exam.
Okay.
Right. Again, I whenever I say the general rule, I'm not doing 50 state perfect survey. Right. I'm trying to speak with broad brushes, which is it makes it a little bit easier. But yeah, there are always going to be a million exceptions to everything. All right. What else? If I ever told you all the exceptions in various states, you'd never learn anything. It's actually always a challenge. All right. Other questions on this case? Yes, sir.
So they jointly met the elements of prescription,
Correct.
but if only Frank had met it, he'd been able to still assign his one stock.
So
Would it have to all the people who didn't meet it if they didn't meet it jointly?
all right. So I mean, they were running the business together, so it'd be hard to argue that only Frank. But imagine that Rufus went off to Europe for 10 years and he came back. Frank would have it by himself, and then he could have conveyed it on his own. But I guess the rule of thumb is if you're going to acquire an easement with your brother, make sure you get along well. All right, don't try to jointly. I mean, who asked about tacking before with tacking prescriptive easements? It's very hard to think of an example where that would actually work, right? Because you generally want to get it for yourself and you wouldn't share it, so it's hard. All right, what else? This is messy, but I think we got the gist of it. All right, Brown versus Voss. Anyone want to give the facts there? No? Oh, yes, sir. Yes.
This is a land.
Okay. I got the picture on the board. Just give me a second. Pull it up. Okay, here it is.
The parcel is by Voss. And Brown owns parcel B and he later buys parcel B, so they acquired both of them to look at sellers.
Good.
And it was just
Mm-hmm.
basically each individual separated new and the salty neighbors started.
Salty neighbors. Oh, I love that. Oh, that's so. Someone said spice in the other class. You said salty. It's interesting. Okay, just you got different like food words. I like that.
And we started putting up a chain fence. And
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Brown sought the exemption as well as to stop that stuff. And the trial court ruled for Brown, but then that was later overturned and later so basically Brown is trying to allow the easement to also be used on parcel B. He owns those pieces of land, but if they don't want him, then cease and do him.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mason. Very good. So there's a concept of scope of the easement, right? Scope of the easement. Easements are very precise, right? Express easements, at least. Implied easements aren't even written down. But express easements are written down and they're usually very precise. And they might say something like, the owner of parcel B can cross over parcel A to get to the road. And it might actually define where parcel B is. It says, these coordinates with meets and bounds, right? It measures exactly where it is. Why are easements so precise? So that courts can enforce them. Now, it often happens that people go to court, say, judge, Can you extend an easement? Can you modify the scope of the easement? Well, the short answer is if you want to modify an easement, pay up, right? Give some more money, the owner of parcel A, to acquire a new document, a new easement. But for whatever reason, people don't do that. Maybe they don't want to pay for it. Maybe these neighbors, they're salty, they don't get along well, they're coming to blows. So people go to courts. And the general rule is that extending an easement is misuse, right? You cannot extend an easement beyond the scope. So in this case, the easement specifically said the owner of lot B can cross onto cross into lot A to get to the road. Alas, the owner of parcel B decided to build a structure that crossed over to lot C. And there was going to be a driveway. The driveway would also go into lot C. So he went beyond the scope of the easement. So what would civilized neighbors do in this sort of case? They would say, hey, neighbor, I want to build this new driveway. I want to build this new structure. Can you just, extend my easement? I'll give you some money. That's not what happened here. It seems what happened here is that the owner of lot B just started building and didn't really say anything. And maybe he was in good faith, right? Maybe he thought the easement covered it. Maybe he had no idea what the hell an easement was. Maybe he never even thought about it, right? We don't have all the facts, but we can assume that however things started, it got ugly because the owner of lot A did a thing you're never supposed to do. He built a fence. He put up a chain link fence. And it's a general rule of thumb. If you put up a fence in your property to block someone, you're going to lose, right? I think in every case in the book where someone builds it's called a spite fence. We build a spite fence, you lose. The courts don't like this because this guy is now landlocked. He can't get to the road, right? I don't know how he even got to. Maybe he went to the trees. I don't even know. All right. So what are you supposed to do if you're landlocked, which is what happens here, and your neighbor won't give you an easement? Well, one option that's actually raised in the dissent is eminent domain. You can actually ask the government to condemn, that is, to seize the roadway and make it a public road. Or they can build a public road by the trees off to the side, right? There are different options. But none of those options happened. Instead, the owner of lot B went to court and said, I want an extension of the easement. The trial court actually granted it, kind of, right? The trial court didn't actually say we're extending the easement. He just said, I'm putting an injunction to make them lift up this fence, to lift up the debris on the road, right? But if you think about why is there an injunction, it's because he's likely to succeed on the merits and that there is a right to use a property. There's an extension of the easement. So the lower court actually basically agreed to extend the easement. But what happened on appeal is kind of weird. They wouldn't think this is a weird case. Both cases, they were kind of strange. The state Supreme Court said, no, you cannot extend the easement. So you might think that, okay, you can't extend the easement. That means, lot A wins, right? But then they go into this next part of the opinion. The court says, well, our standard of review is abuse of discretion, which might be right, might be wrong. I'm not sure. Usually for questions of law, it's de novo, but they say, well, we'll use abuse of discretion. And we say, given the circumstances, we find that the trial court did not abuse its discretion. The issuance of the injunction was reasonable. Therefore, we affirm. Huh? If the lower court got the law wrong, how on earth can you affirm? And the dissent basically calls them out. It's like, what are you guys doing? This doesn't make any sense. This is one of these rare cases, I think, where the equity really moved the court, right? They looked at this situation. You had a guy being a jerk, putting up logs, putting up trees, fences, and stuff on the road. And they said, all right, well, we don't want to set a bad precedent here. We don't want to reward bad conduct, right? They probably thought that the owner of lot B was acting in good faith. They just said, okay, we'll just say affirm and make an incoherent ruling, which is exactly what we have. The rule is incoherent. But the rule, I think, is correct. The rule is you cannot extend an easement. That's a black letter misuse of the easement. Okay. So that's a holding of the case. Weird holding. Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Say it again. If the dominant estate is B, can I have an easement? Okay.
Cannot have any.
Well, B has an easement, but C does not.
Okay, it's just, it's a little weird to me because he's only using the easement that was there.
But he's also using it from C. That's the problem. The driveway extends onto C, and part of the structure extends onto C.
Yeah, but, okay, but if A doesn't change at all, then how is it?
If A doesn't what?
If A doesn't, if the path,
So you're saying there's no burden on A?
there's no burden.
Ah,
on-
okay, good question. All right. So the question is, there's no burden on A. Why is A complaining so much? Let's say C builds an apartment complex and has 15 families living there. And now all those families are driving on the road every day. Would you say there's a burden there?
There would be, but wouldn't the,
Once you extend an easement, you're extending it to the owner of A, whatever the hell he builds on A, right? So I mean, that's why you maybe fight for these principles. If you say, okay, whatever, he's just encroaching a little bit, I'll let him use it. You're not acquiescing to potentially a much greater burden on your property.
I would just think if he owns both pieces of land and he's like his house, it would be different if he was like, someone else owns C and I'm.
But once you extend the easement, you don't know what's going to happen later, right? Once you extend the easement, what if in 5 years he builds 5 houses? And look how big that lot is, pretty big. He tears down those trees and builds another 5 houses, and he brings his entire family, his mom, his dad, his grandma, grandpa, everyone moves in. Once the court extends an easement, now I think Casey might ask you, can you limit the easement, right? Yeah, that's your question. Yeah. Why couldn't the court have said, okay, we will extend the easement for the sole purpose of this driveway and this structure, and if any other structure is built here, it will not be covered. Is that your question? You could do that. Still, I think it's a misuse. That'd be a better use of equity, right? Instead of saying injunction, we will maybe you could call it an easement by necessity, or call it maybe a quasi easement, call it something else. But we're going to give a quasi easement for the benefit of C only while this current structure is in place. And if you build some bigger structure, it will not extend. Will that make sense?
Yeah, I was just having a hard time understanding that thing has changed.
Because he's worried about the future. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow, as the song goes. Sorry. Everyone else, don't stop thinking about tomorrow. That's song, right? No, it was Al Gore's campaign theme. Don't you remember? Ay vey.
So on the exam,
Yes,
if
ma'am.
something like this were to come up, because we know the majority, they weren't wrong because it was equity, but at the same time, the extension was a misuse. Should we kind of go with the dissent, but say also?
I would. I mean, in candor, I would say that you can extend the easement. I think that's the correct ruling on law. Maybe may have asked a question if courts are exercising their equitable jurisdiction and they're confronted with situations involving, these sorts of neighborly disputes. How should they behave? That might be a place to bring it in. Because I always ask a policy question, right? In every exam, there's a couple policy questions. I think I've actually, don't quote me on this, but I think I've actually asked in the past, how should courts use equitable powers when granting easements? I think that's been a question I've asked one form or another. Okay, KC. I've done pictures before. I've had illustrations. I had one exam, might have been property one, where I actually had a Monopoly game board, all different properties on the board, different, like, boardwalk acre, and the little Monopoly pieces. But I've had pictures. Yeah, I can't really see on the exam. Yeah.
I would see limit.
Yeah. I again, this is another reason why I don't think this was a good case to extend the easement. It might have just, did the postscript say he had access? Was there actually a paved road, or was it just sort of access?
Access, all parcels had access to.
But was it necessarily a clean paved road? Do we know that? I don't.
It's an 18-wheeler on that road, 101.
No, I know, but to get from C to the road, was there a paved road, or was it just sort of you could between the
Okay,
trees.
like this tree.
Right. So I think so you just wanted to use that road. All right.
I'm thinking it's more like.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it wasn't safe. I mean, just looking at this picture, you're right, coming right on the on the freeway. Maybe it wasn't safe. I don't know. But yeah, I don't think this would be a case for easement by necessity at all. Maybe that's maybe a quasi easement. But there really wasn't any prior usage either. He hadn't even built the road yet. So I think the owner of B should have lost here. I think this is actually an easy case. Oh, he loses. Yeah. Yeah. No. The postscript is real long, but some good, some fun, some salty stuff in there. I guess some spicy stuff, as it were. Okay. Okay. What else? Okay. At the end of the reading, there's a topic on termination of easements. On termination of easements. And there are different ways to terminate an easement. I'll just walk through them. One is what's called a release. A release. Right? What's a release? Let's say you have an easement in gross. Right? The person who's benefited can say, you know what? I no longer want to benefit from this easement. I'm going to release it. That's got to be in writing. Right? You can just release it. Or the owner of the dominant tenement can say, I am releasing you from this burden. Maybe pay me for it. You might get some money out of it, but you can release. It's also possible to have an expiration date, right? Let's say I give you an easement for 5 years. You can do that, right? You know, it's a term of years, so to speak. So there can be an expiration date. What if you have an easement by necessity, right? Let's say that you're landlocked, and the only way to get out is through easement, and then the state builds a new road that lets you out, or they build a bridge or something, right? If the easement by, I'm sorry, if the necessity eliminates, if there's no more necessity, the easement by necessity terminates. You can't keep it forever. Okay. I mentioned earlier the merger doctrine. If the same person owns both the dominant and servient tenements, the easement vanishes. Okay. Of course, our good friend estoppel. Courts can always sort of modify things based on issues of fairness. Okay. What else? Oh, condemnation, or also called eminent domain. If the government seizes your property and they pay you just compensation, that eliminates any possible easements on the property. Right. When the government gets something, they get the full bundle of sticks. They're not getting a partial bundle. And let's say that you have a life estate, there's an easement on it, and there's some future remainder. Eminent domain wipes it all out. The state owns it free and clear. There's no future or present interests. Prescription. This is kind of a trippy thought, but let's say that I acquire a right to cross over a specific path. And I do this for 10 years, right? That's my vested interest. And then someone does the exact same thing. They walk on my path for 10 years and I don't stop them. They've acquired my easement. Weird, right? Or let's use the example of bathing. Let's say that over 20 years, Frank and Rufus allowed bathing. And then they stopped. And then someone comes along and allows bathing for 20 years. They've now acquired the prescriptive easement that Frank and Rufus had. So you can actually basically squat on a squatter.
How do you know if a person, how do you know if they're,
It's got to be open and notorious, the exact same rules.
how do they know if they're trampling on the rights of the person who?
I know exactly what you're asking. It's kind of like a fanciful example. But let's say you knew that these brothers were running their business there for 20 years, and they got a prescriptive easement, and then you squat on theirs, and it's hostile. You got it. I don't know how often this happens, but it's possible. Another issue is abandonment. This one gets very tricky. Let's say you have an easement to run a railroad, and you build a railroad, and then the railroad goes out of business. and a decade after decade passes, and the railroad's been abandoned. You have these tracks there just laid there. The courts have held that in some cases, the easement, the right of way, is actually abandoned, and it can revert back to the grantor. In other words, the person who originally gave up part of their land, let's say that I allowed a railroad track to be put through my farm, right? Eventually, the railroad goes out of business. The farm owner or its heirs now have that easement back. They have a fee simple. So this came up a lot with what are called the rails to trails, where there are lots of railroads around the country that have been abandoned. And the government said, aha, let's make them into trails, park trails. And this litigation went on forever because you have to figure out who actually owned the property. Right? The government said, oh, we'll just make these public parks. And they're like, no, my great-great-grandfather, it has the reversionary interest. All right. Questions? Yes, sir.
As far as the abandonment goes, is it possible to abandon the easement at work, like the time of the easement change? Can you abandon the easement at that point?
I think I know what you're asking. I'm not sure. Can you ask it one more time, please?
Like, say I have an easement to cross over, I'm parcel B and I have an easement to cross over parcel A.
Okay.
If something changes with that, or if A changes something with their land, that's considered.
Oh, like, okay. So there's something called change circumstances. There used to be a case in the book, they removed it, but the setup was like this. At one point, an easement was given in a neighborhood where there were like no people live there. And then over time, children moved to the area. And there were lots of children walking in this area. And they didn't want these big cars going through it. And there was actually an argument that the easement was no longer enforceable because the circumstances changed.
That's different from abandonment.
That's different. And the courts don't like that doctrine either because they say if the circumstances have changed, renegotiate your deal, right? Don't come to the court asking. But there are cases where the court says, or the parties say, look, we negotiated this one as a very, sparse area. It was okay for big trucks come through. Now it's become more residential. There are kids crossing the street. Don't enforce this easement anymore. And the courts say, we're going to enforce the easement. That's the general rule. So it's different from abandonment. It's called change circumstances. And there used to be a case in the book from Nevada. Or it's Arizona. I think they took it out. I can't remember.
Right, so if you negotiate, you don't have the right to abandon the easement, because the court would still enforce the easement.
Well, in that case, it wasn't abandoned at all. That the trucking people still wanted to use the road, but the people in the community said, "Let's abandon it." But that might actually maybe it was a zoning case, but it's the same idea. Okay. Okay. What other questions? Go ahead. Yes, I I gotcha.
Do I get the one free stick that's blown out now?
Yes. So let's say again, your great great grandfather gave an easement to a railroad company to put a track down. The railroad's been abandoned. You then get that stick back in your bundle if you're the heir. That's correct. Yeah, a lot of this was whether they actually lifted up the tracks. They leave the tracks there. Was it actually abandonment? Because eventually these railroad companies were actually acquired, in bankruptcy by someone. Someone wanted the land, and it wasn't very useful. All right, let me wrap up and summarize. We're almost out of time. When we're talking about easements, again, you have to think about assignability and divisibility. At common law, you generally could not assign an easement in gross, and they could not be divided. But in the modern rule, you can assign them, and they can be divided unilaterally. Okay. Questions? All right. I will turn the exit polling on now. Please read very carefully for Monday. The topic is not easy, and covenants, if you don't get it at the outset, you fall behind quick because it's not it's a hard topic. I'm just being candid with you all. All right. Thank you so much. I'm happy to talk if you want to talk.